In a prestigious academy where privilege determines worth, an elite mathematics professor singles out the janitor's daughter to solve an impossible equation as a form of public humiliation, never suspecting that the quiet girl in worn clothes carries mathematical brilliance that will shatter every assumption in the room. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Alina Martinez kept her head down as she walked through the gleaming corridors of Westfield Academy. Her father, Robert, had been the head janitor at this prestigious private school for 15 years, and today was Bring Your Child to Work Day. At 17, Elena felt out of place among the privileged students who wore designer clothes and carried expensive laptops. Her worn jeans and simple sweater made her stick out like a dandelion in a bed of roses. "Remember, mija, just stay quiet in the back of the classroom," Robert had instructed her that morning. "Professor Harrington said it was fine for you to observe his advanced calculus class while I finish my rounds." Elena nodded, clutching her tattered notebook. What her father didn't know was that she had been secretly studying calculus on her own for years, using discarded textbooks and free online courses. Math had always been her sanctuary, a world where background and social status didn't matter. Professor James Harrington's classroom was imposing, rows of polished desks facing a massive whiteboard covered in complex equations. The students filed in, some casting curious glances at Elena as she slipped into a seat in the back corner. Professor Harrington, a tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, began his lecture without acknowledging her presence. "Today, we'll be addressing a particularly challenging problem from the International Mathematics Olympiad," he announced, writing a complex differential equation on the board. This stumped some of the brightest young mathematicians in the world last year. The classroom fell silent as students stared at the equation, their faces a mixture of concentration and confusion. Elena studied it from her corner, her mind already racing through possible approaches. Her fingers itched to pick up a pencil. "Anyone care to attempt a solution?" Professor Harrington asked, his tone suggesting he didn't expect much. A few hands went up tentatively, only to be lowered when he called on them, and their stammered explanations fell short. After 15 minutes of failed attempts, Professor Harrington's frustration was evident. His gaze swept across the room and landed on Elena, who was furiously scribbling in her notebook. "You there in the back," he called out sharply. "The janitor's daughter. Since you seem more interested in your doodling than paying attention, perhaps you'd like to share what you're working on." The class turned to stare at Elena, some snickering, others looking embarrassed for her. She froze, her cheeks burning. "I asked you a question, young lady," Professor Harrington pressed, clearly intending to make an example of her. "Come to the board and show us what was so important that you couldn't pay attention to our discussion." Elena hesitated, then slowly stood up. She walked to the front of the class, every step echoing in the silent room. A boy in the front row whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This should be good. The cleaning lady's kid is going to teach us calculus." Professor Harrington handed her a marker with a condescending smile. "Please, enlighten us." Elena took a deep breath and began writing. Her hand moved confidently across the board, filling it with symbols, numbers, and logical steps. She worked in complete silence for nearly 5 minutes, the only sound the squeak of the marker against the whiteboard. Professor Harrington's smug expression gradually transformed into one of astonishment. The students stopped snickering and leaned forward in their seats, watching as Elena implemented an elegant solution that none of them had considered. When she finished, she capped the marker and turned to face the class. "I think this works," she said quietly. "But there's another approach using Jacobian transformations that might be more efficient." Professor Harrington stared at the board, checking her work step by step. The classroom remained silent, awaiting his verdict. "This is," he began, then cleared his throat. "This is correct," and frankly, it's brilliant. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but nobody moved. Professor Harrington was still examining Elena's solution, muttering to himself. "How did you learn this?" He finally asked her. Elena shrugged. "I like math. I borrow books from the library and watch lectures online. Sometimes I go through the textbooks students leave behind." The professor shook his head in disbelief. "Miss Martinez, this solution would challenge doctoral candidates at MIT. Have you considered where you might go to college?" Elena's face fell. "College isn't really in the cards for me, sir. We can't afford it, and my grades at public school are good, but not scholarship-worthy." She didn't mention that between helping her father with his night-cleaning job and caring for her younger siblings, she barely had time for homework. The students began filing out, many of them looking at Elena with new eyes. Some nodded respectfully. Others seemed uncomfortable with the shift in their worldview. Professor Harrington watched them leave, then turned back to Elena. "I'd like to speak with your father," he said, "and I'd like you to take a formal assessment. We have a scholarship, fund for exceptional students, and I believe the board would be very interested in your abilities." Robert Martinez was finishing his afternoon rounds when he spotted Elena walking toward him alongside Professor Harrington. His weathered hands tightened instinctively around the handle of his mop as a knot of anxiety formed in his stomach. In 15 years of working at Westfield Academy, he had learned that when teachers approached with his children, it rarely meant good news. He had endured countless parent-teacher conferences where educators spoke about potential and application, while subtly suggesting his parenting was somehow lacking. But the expression on Professor Harrington's face was different, not stern or disappointed, but animated with an excitement Robert couldn't recall ever seeing on the austere mathematician's face. "Mr. Martinez," Professor Harrington called out, extending his hand with unexpected warmth. "Your daughter has quite an extraordinary gift. I've been teaching advanced mathematics for 25 years, and I've rarely encountered a mind like hers." Robert wiped his palm on his uniform before accepting the handshake, glancing at Elena with confusion. She stood straighter than he was accustomed to seeing her, no longer hunched as if trying to disappear. A small, almost secret smile played on her lips. "She just solved a problem that has stumped many of my brightest students," Professor Harrington continued. "Not only solved it, but approached it with an elegance and intuition that frankly astounds me." Robert looked at Elena in surprise. "Is this true, mija?" he asked in Spanish, momentarily forgetting Professor Harrington's presence. Elena nodded, a spark in her eyes that Robert recognized from long ago. The same look she had as a small child when figuring out complex puzzles or helping her younger siblings with their homework. Somehow, in the daily struggle of their lives, that spark had dimmed, or perhaps he had simply stopped noticing it. "She has always been good with numbers," Robert said carefully, switching back to English. "Since she was very little, she helps with our budget, our taxes." He trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about revealing their financial situation to this man whose weekly salary likely exceeded his monthly earnings. Professor Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the practical application, but what Elena demonstrated today goes far beyond everyday mathematics. She tackled a problem from the International Mathematics Olympiad, one that was designed to challenge the most gifted students in the world." Robert's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter. He thought of all the night shifts he had worked, all the floors he had scrubbed, all to provide his children with the basic necessities. He thought of Elena, staying up late to help, her siblings with homework after finishing her own, then waking at dawn to prepare breakfast before school. He thought of the advanced classes she had begged to take at her public school, only to be told there wasn't enough staff or funding. "I'd like to propose something," Professor Harrington continued, his tone shifting to one Robert recognized from overhearing board meetings, the voice of someone making an executive decision. "Elena should finish her senior year here at Westfield on a full scholarship. Our Pritchard Foundation for Exceptional Students was established precisely for cases like this, though I admit we've never had a candidate quite as exceptional as your daughter." Robert blinked, certain he had misheard. "Here? At Westfield?" "Yes, with immediate effect. I've already spoken to Headmistress Vanderbilt, and she agrees entirely. Elena's mathematical abilities are too extraordinary to ignore, and I'd like to personally mentor her for university applications. With her abilities and the right guidance, she could qualify for full scholarships at top mathematics programs. MIT, Stanford, Princeton, any of them would be fortunate to have her." Elena's eyes widened at the mention of these institutions that had existed only in her dreams. Names she had seen on the spines of textbooks she borrowed, universities whose free online lectures she had devoured late at night on the family's shared computer. "But," Robert began, his mind racing to practical concerns, "the uniform, the books, the transportation." He calculated quickly in his head. Even with a tuition waiver, the peripheral costs of Westfield would strain their budget beyond breaking. "Professor," Harrington waved a hand dismissively, "the scholarship covers everything, Mr. Martinez. Uniforms, books, supplies, meals, transportation, everything. We're not in the business of setting students up to fail." Robert looked at Elena, silently, asking what she wanted. For so long, their family decisions had been dictated by necessity rather than desire. What could you afford? What was practical? What would help the family survive another month? The luxury of choice was unfamiliar territory. "I want this, Papa," Elena said softly. "I really do." Robert nodded slowly, still processing the sudden shift in their reality. "All these years," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "you've been helping me count inventory and balance checkbooks. I kept telling you it was good practice for running a business someday. I never realized—" "It's okay, Papa," Elena replied, with a smile that held no reproach. "I didn't know either until today that math could open doors like this." Professor Harrington cleared his throat, seemingly moved by the exchange. "There is paperwork, of course, but we can handle that tomorrow. For now, I suggest Elena joins us for the remainder of today's classes to get acclimated. I have another advanced session this afternoon that I think she would find stimulating." Robert embraced his daughter tightly, whispering in her ear, "Your mother would be so proud of you today." Elena held on to him a moment longer than usual, both of them understanding that this marked a fundamental change in their family's trajectory. As Elena walked away with Professor Harrington, Robert returned to his mopping with renewed vigor. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond the grinding determination to survive. He felt hope. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of adjustments and revelations. Elena's transition to Westfield Academy was not without challenges. The scholarship covered her material needs, but the social and cultural divide proved more difficult to bridge. Some students, like Marcus Chen and Aisha Williams, welcomed her immediately, impressed by her mathematical prowess and refreshingly unpretentious manner. Others, particularly those whose academic standing had been threatened by her arrival, maintained a cold distance. In her third week, Elena encountered Sophia Whitmore in the library, the girl who had once loudly commented on her worn shoes during a parent function years earlier. Sophia approached Elena's table, where complex equations sprawled across multiple notebooks. "I heard you're working with Professor Harrington on a special research project," Sophia said, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity beneath the practiced nonchalance. Elena glanced up, cautious. "Yes. We're exploring applications of non-Euclidean geometry in quantum computing." Sophia shifted her weight from one foot to another. "I've been struggling with the latest problem set. Everyone says you explain concepts better than the TAs. She hesitated, then added with visible effort, Would you mind helping me sometime?" Elena considered the request, remembering her father's advice about bridges being stronger than barriers. "I'm free now if you want to work through it together." By the time midterm assessments arrived, Elena had established herself not only as an exceptional mathematician, but as a generous peer tutor. The study group that formed around her included students from every social stratum of Westfield, united by their respect for her intellect and appreciation for her patience. At home, the Martinez family dynamics shifted subtly. Elena's younger siblings looked at her with new admiration, particularly 14-year-old Miguel, who began paying more attention to his own studies. "If Elena can do it, maybe I can too," he told his father one evening, showing him a science test marked with an A. Robert found himself invited to parent functions he had previously only attended as staff. The first time he entered Westfield's grand ballroom as a parent rather than the man who would clean up afterward, he felt acutely out of place in his only suit purchased years ago for his wedding. But when Professor Harrington introduced him to several board members as the father of our most promising mathematics student in a decade, Robert stood taller, remembering his own father's words. "Your dignity is not determined by others' perceptions. By December, Elena had completed applications to 7 prestigious universities, each submission carefully reviewed by Professor Harrington. "They would be fools not to accept you," he told her, after reading her personal statement, which eloquently connected her experience as the daughter of immigrants to her passion for mathematics as a universal language. 3 months after that, fateful day in Professor Harrington's classroom, Elena sat in his advanced theoretical mathematics class as a full student of Westfield Academy. Her uniform, though new, was worn with the same unpretentiousness that characterized everything she did. Her approach remained unchanged, hard-working, humble, and brilliant. The students who had once snickered now regularly sought her guidance with difficult problem sets. On a crisp January morning, Elena arrived at class to find an envelope on her desk. The return address displayed the distinctive logo of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. With trembling fingers, she opened it to discover an invitation for an early admission interview, specifically with the Department of Mathematics, prestigious combinatorics research group. Next to the MIT letter sat a small note in Professor Harrington's precise handwriting. "Sometimes the greatest mathematical minds are found in the most unexpected places. Never stop solving problems, Elena. The world needs more minds like yours. Minds that see patterns where others see only chaos." Elena traced her fingers over the words, remembering the girl who had hidden her abilities, who had believed that certain paths were simply not available to people like her. That girl seemed distant now, like a character from someone else's story. As the classroom filled with her peers, several stopped to congratulate her, having noticed the distinctive MIT envelope. The same boy who had made the cleaning ladies' kid comment months earlier now asked if she would mind reviewing his calculus project over lunch. Through the classroom window, Elena spotted her father in the hallway, polishing the school's trophy case with his characteristic attention to detail. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod and smile that contained everything they needed to communicate: pride, love, and shared acknowledgement of how far they had come. As Professor Harrington began the day's lecture on Galois theory, Elena raised her hand confidently, ready to engage with the material and whatever new challenges lay ahead. The journey from hiding in the back of the classroom to claiming her place at the front had taken only a few months, but it had transformed not just her future, but her understanding of what was possible. In that moment, as sunlight streamed through, the classroom windows illuminating her notes, Elena realized that mathematics had never been just about numbers for her. It had been about possibility, about patterns that revealed themselves to those patient enough to look, about certainty in an uncertain world. Now it had become something more, a bridge between the life she had been given and the life she would choose